Here's how you pray. Our Father. You guys are focusing on a man, and you're forgetting God, the Father.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, Jesus said of himself, he said, before Abraham was born, I am. Why did people pick up stones to stone him when he said that?
It says in the Torah, you should know this day and take it to your heart. The Lord is God. In the heaven above and on the earth below, there's nothing else. There's nothing besides God. God is the I am. Over in Hinduism, they say that man is God. That's idolatry. God is unlimited. God is infinite. That man is not infinite. He's limited. This argument's been going on for 2,000 years. I don't think I'm going to change your mind and understand. You're a pastor in the church. You have your book and your way of understanding. You're going to keep on saying it says what you want to say. What I would like you to learn, you're a decent human being. Go to the Father. Go to the King. You're always focusing on, I read that you say you're here only to serve Yashka. You're here only to serve him. Serve the Father. Serve the King. He's the one. He's the creator of all.
I believe that his teachings were true, that he is God who became man and took on a body for the purpose of sacrifice, to be sacrificed as a Passover lamb for the forgiveness of my sin.
The Torah tells us clearly, no man will die for another man's sins. The Father won't die for the Son's sins, and the Son won't die for the Father's sin. The Bible tells us this. Now you come along and say, this man died for somebody else's sins. That contradicts the Torah.
The Israel we know today is not the one from the Bible. Biblical Israel and modern Israel are two different entities. Ancient Israel was a theocratic monarchy in covenant with Yahweh, a covenant centered on the Torah, the law of Moses. Modern Israel, on the other hand, is a secular liberal democracy that makes special provision for Jewish citizenship and draws on Jewish ideals and values. Biblical Israel ceased to be a unified kingdom in the late 10th century BCE. The northern kingdom fell in 721 BCE, the southern in 587 BCE. The modern state of Israel was legally founded on May 12, 1948, acting on the United Nations resolution that was passed on November 29, 1947. Neither Moses nor Abraham will accept the current state of Israel as biblical Israel. Majority of them are atheists. Biblical Israel is based on Torah from Mount Sinai, but modern Israel is based on socialism and Western democracy.
David is a lot deeper than you think. In Hebrew it's called the Magen David, or the Shield of David, and it symbolizes the essence of the Jewish people. If you take a look at the Magen David, you'll notice a triangle pointing upwards towards heaven, which represents the spiritual domain, and another triangle pointing downwards, which represents the physical world. In Jewish tradition, this represents our belief in living a life of fusing both the physical and the spiritual worlds together. The Star of David is a six-pointed star, representing the six possible directions one can move: up, down, north, south, east, and west. Parts of the physicality that's in this world is for us to enjoy, not to run away from. So wherever we are or wherever we move, there's a consciousness of uplifting the mundane. So take something physical like food or money and connect it to its spiritual domain by blessing it or giving it away to charity. And if you notice, in the middle of the star, there's a central place, a location that holds everything together. And that's where our consciousness lies, in both the physical and the spiritual. So if you're wearing the Star of David on your chest, wear it with pride. Know that it represents a belief of living a life in harmony. Am Yisrael Chai.
Stop! Good, yeah, give him in the head, give me, I want a picture, yeah. תקשיב, חרדים, מרביצים לחרדים בניו יורק. מדהים. הוא לקח מה זה. איזה דבר. טוב מאוד, טוב מאוד. Go home. Bye-bye. Good. Good job. Good job. איזה דבר. חרדים, חרדים, אחלה גברים שבעולם, לוקחים לחרדים. You are the real Jew. You are the real Jew. You are the real Jew. You are the real Jew.
What's your thoughts? Please be respectful with your comments. Also, please click the like, click the notification bell, and subscribe to this channel.
The Star of David is never mentioned in the Holy Bible. The only time this star right here was ever mentioned was when Stephen was being stoned to death outside the city walls of Jerusalem. And that's next on the trumpet. You can see right here, there is no reference to the star or shield of David in the Bible. The book of Acts records the very first martyr for Jesus Christ, and this is what he said to the people that were about to put him to death by stoning. Yea, ye took up the tabernacle of Moloch, and the star of your god Remphan, figures which ye made to worship them, and I will carry you away beyond Babylon. Moloch. Leviticus is book number 3 in the Old Testament. And thou shalt not let any of thy seed pass through the fire of Moloch. It's still right there in Jerusalem. Right behind that place where Moloch is the temple that Solomon built. But Solomon built him a house. It's continued right there in Acts when Stephen was being stoned. And he told the people, howbeit the Most High dwelleth not in temples made with hands, as saith the prophet. Heaven is my throne, and earth is my footstool. What house will ye build for me, saith the Lord, or what is the place of my rest? The book of Acts continues, hath not my hand made all these things? Ye stiff-necked and uncircumcised in heart and ears, ye do always resist the Holy Ghost, as your fathers did, so do ye. When they heard these things, they were cut to the heart, and they gnashed on him with their teeth. This is in the dome of the courthouse where they were just trying Donald Trump. And almost 2,000 years later, the Nazis reintroduced the star badge for the Jews. The Nazi policy for forcing Jews to wear a star was an act of symbolization, which aimed to divide the Jewish and non-Jewish population. As soon as the Germans entered Poland, they began to persecute the Jews. Jews were not permitted to practice their professions. They were not allowed to keep their shops open or walk on the pavement. They soon made us wear a yellow Star of David pinned on the front and back of our clothes. Without it, you were not allowed to go out. David never actually used the symbol. It was actually with his son Solomon that the story begins. It was called the Seal of Solomon. This symbol was legendary among those in the medieval mystical arts. It was believed that the Seal of Solomon, a signet ring given by God, granted King Solomon power over supernatural beings and allowed him to communicate with animals. I wonder what kind of animal that could have been. Remember, iron sharpens iron. Proverbs 27:17. You know me and my family love you in Jesus' name, so please like and follow the trumpet for more. And have a blessed day.
Y'all, so I was looking through the Bible, and I was trying to find the Star of David. I looked through Genesis all the way to Revelation, and I could not find the Star of David. However, I did find a star, the Star of Moloch, Remphan, Satan. And then I asked myself, what is this? And why do we use this symbol as the Star of David? Because just by looking at the symbol, I see a couple issues. One, look in the middle, and you will see a hexagram. Do y'all know what a hexagram is? Or like what it means? H-E-X? Yeah, go and Google that. And for those who don't want to use Google, it means a curse, a spell, witchcraft, sorcery. Last time I checked, God said not to deal with witchcraft and sorcery. But y'all want to know something else? There's 6 sides in the hexagram. There's also 6 small triangles within the 6 big triangles. 6, 6, 6, giving very much the number of the beast. And it's crazy how many believers, praise this symbol. But if you ask certain people, like a small group of people, this symbol is also used by people who are members of a particular gang. So on one hand, the symbol is praised, and on the other hand, the symbol is looked down upon, just like Satan, causing confusion. And this is another reason why Satan uses this tactic, symbolism that is, because symbolism transcends language, even if the origins of that symbol is evil. But more on that later. This star has nothing to do with the Most High.
You know, at synagogue, we read out of a Siddur, and we never even open the Bible. I mean, the closest thing we get is the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses.
Turn to Isaiah 53.
I turned to Isaiah 53.
Turn to Psalm 2.
And I said, okay, flipped it over, found Psalm 2.
Turn to Psalm 22.
And I said, okay, turn to Psalm 22, read that.
Who do you think they're talking about?
I mean, if you're asking me, it sounds like they're talking about Jesus. But how could they? This is my Jewish Bible I got from my bar mitzvah.
Well, why do you think they're not talking about Jesus?
And I said, well, he was Catholic, right?
No. He was Jewish.
Isaiah 53:5, written 700 years before Christ, says he was pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed.
I have called you, and I'm not alone in this, many Jews have called you an anti-Semite. I've also talked to people who say you have a really sweet heart, just so you know. You and I have a number of mutual friends in the world. But I think it's important to first identify what anti-Semitism is. It is a different type of hate than any other type of hate in the world. And if you and I are speaking crossways because we have a different understanding and definition, that's not going to lead to any dialogue. That's not going to lead. Look, I said to Scott, I'd love to walk out of here and say, you know what, I was wrong, and write an article, I apologize, and I was wrong. But the first piece is to have a mutual understanding of what is anti-Semitism. I think that would help a tremendous amount.
I actually totally agree with you on that. That is a perfect place to start. Could you provide for us a definition of anti-Semitism?
Absolutely. I really appreciate that, because I think that is the break. If we're not speaking the same language, where can we go, right? So there's a man, a blessed memory man named Lord Jonathan Sachs, who was the chief rabbi of England. He had a great line. He really defined anti-Semitism. That anti-Semitism is Jews have no right to exist collectively as Jews with the same rights as other human beings. Which is kind of a weird statement. So let's just track back to understand the history of anti-Semitism. 2,000 years ago, Jews don't accept Jesus as Messiah. For people who do not have faith, as the early Christians, as some of them have faith, some of them accept Jesus, but they don't really in their heart. And you and I both know people like Rob McCoy who accepts it fully in their heart, and other people who are doing it without faith. And those who have less faith, the fact that a Jew exists, let alone thrives, is a threat to their faith, because how can the Jew not accept Jesus as God and still thrive? Unless he's associated with the devil. So you start having these myths that are created of the Jew being identified with the opposite of God. This really codifies in 1144 in Norwich, England, what's called the Blood Libel. And this is really important to understand, especially today in 2024. In 1144, a young boy is killed, and the local priest says that's because the Jews need to make their matzah with Christian blood. It's called the Blood Libel. It's blame the problems of other people on the Jew. It's just so you know, that's so ridiculous, not only just on its face, but we're forbidden from even having meat that has any blood in it. This is a Torah law. You can't have, that's why, we can't have steak tartare. Okay? So this gets perpetuated in combination with a 4th century, what's called the Vulgate.
I'm sorry, did you say in 1140 this happened?
1144 in Norwich, England.
Okay.
This is after, in the 4th century, you have something called the Vulgate. The Vulgate is the official translation of the Bible. In Hebrew, there's no vowels. And the person who translates, St. Jerome, who translates the Vulgate, knows what he's doing is translating wrong. He puts down that when Moses comes down from Mount Sinai, he has horns. Okay, Karen. when actually the word was Quran, meaning that light shone from his head. So now by 1144, you have the anti-Semitic myth of Jews have horns and they drink blood. And I know people who've been asked when they went into the army and other places, can I see your horns? So this still exists today in 2024 throughout America. And I don't mean just in little rural areas. It exists today, these myths. That Vulgate Bible is the official Catholic Bible all the way through the 1970s. So it is, you need to understand that that's a piece of it, okay? That they're equated with this kind of hate. Because it's about Jews not having the right to exist collectively, when they live in their little communities in the Middle Ages, anti-Semitism is a hate against their religion. By the time you get to the 18th and 20th centuries, when so many Jews have assimilated, they are in culture, they are in arts, they're in science, it's no longer against them for their religion, it's against them for their race. Because anti-Semitism is the oldest hate in the world, and the hate that mutates. Anti-Semitism is the oldest hate in the world, and the hate that mutates.
You said it's a hate that mutates.
Correct.
So your belief then is that the definition of anti-Semitism can necessarily change. Is that correct?
It's not just my belief. It is the commonly accepted understanding in both the Jewish and academic worlds.
I mean, anti-Semitic statements are never good for anybody, right? It's kind of like being anti-black.
But, you know, it's really interesting. I didn't realize that I could be considered anti-Semitic till I read one of the definitions of anti-Semitism. Look at this. The definition says, making mendacious, dehumanizing, demonizing, or stereotypical allegations about Jews as such, or the power of Jews as a collective, such as, especially, but not exclusively. This sounds like let it go by. What was that? All right, so it says, think about it, that sounds like the type of wording that's in the contracts, right?
Indeed.
Okay, it says, such as, especially, but not exclusively, the myth about a world Jewish conspiracy or of Jews controlling the media, economy, government, or other societal institutions.
But isn't that what you said? That Jews run everything?
Yeah, but that actually is considered to be anti-Semitic.
Right.
So I didn't realize that it was anti-Semitic to say, hey, you know, I have a Jewish attorney, I have a Jewish record label, I have a Jewish contractor, I have a
Do you regret your statements? Or the statements you think you should be walking back? I mean, considering...
What do you mean walking back?
Well, you know, backing up off of them. I mean, the thing is, you've lost a lot of endorsements. People are dropping you. You're getting, vilified. You know, I mean, you might think you're right, but I think, there's a whole world out there that's condemning you for what you said. Okay, so this right here is a chart of Universal Studios, 20th Century Fox, ABC News, CBS News, Columbia Pictures, Warner Brothers, ESPN Sports, Fox News, Washington Post, Metro Goldwyn Mayer, MTV Music Television, Nickelodeon, USA Today, Wall Street Journal, Comedy Central, NBC Entertainment, Google, what else do we have? Disney, ABC Kids and Family, YouTube, Los Angeles Times, Discovery Network, Paramount Pictures, Facebook, Huffington Post, Yahoo, Marvel, Hulu, Cosmopolitan, Time, Touchstone, Associated Press, Pixar, Miramax, HBO, New York Post, LucasArts, MSNBC, DreamWorks Animation. Now, the thing is, I skipped over maybe about 5 of them because it was just unclear on this list. The red are the executives that are Jewish at these companies.
Do you think they stuck together when they heard what you said? Was that what happened?
Among the bills that are up for consideration are those that would make anti-Semitism a hate crime.
Now, one would adopt the International Holocaust Alliance definition of anti-Semitism and trigger penalties under the state's hate crimes law. But it's already getting pushback. And Fox 5's Christopher King is live at the state capitol with the details on this. Christopher.
Russ, Courtney supporters say this particular bill would define clearly what anti-Semitism is. They say right now there is no definition of anti-Semitism in Georgia code, but opponents say this particular measure could interfere with First Amendment rights. Georgia lawmakers head back to work next week. Among the big issues they'll debate this legislative session, proposals on anti-Semitism.
Our bill would define the term anti-Semitism.
State Representative Esther Panich last year introduced a bill that uses the International Holocaust Alliance definition. Anti-Semitism is hatred toward Jewish people, rhetorical and physical acts against Jewish people, their property, community institutions, and religious facilities.
It would be punished as a hate crime.
Panich, the only Jewish member of the General Assembly, says her bill would place anti-Semitism under the state's existing hate crime law. She says right now there is no definition in the Georgia Code stating what anti-Semitism is.
It defines what it is because right now there's no definition.
This proposal misses the mark on its intention.
Critics like State Representative Rua Roman say the Panich bill would do little to fight anti-Semitism. Roman calls the language in that legislation too vague.
The bill doesn't actually have the definition.
You said it's a hate that mutates.
Correct.
So your belief then is that the definition of anti-Semitism can necessarily change. Is that correct?
It's not just my belief. It is the commonly accepted understanding in both the Jewish and academic worlds.
Here at 5, celebration at the state capitol today from a coalition of Christian and Jewish supporters of Israel. Today, the Georgia House and Senate passed a bill adding anti-Semitism language to the state's hate crimes law. The bill stalled in the Senate for much of last year. 11 Alive's Doug Richards is live at the Capitol where the bill's passage dominated the proceedings today. Doug.
Sure enough. And, repeatedly, backers of this bill said that it would merely add a hate crime penalty to any other type of crime that's charged and has found to have had the motivation of anti-Semitism. So with that explanation, it was a relatively easy sell for members of both political parties. There were more than 100 people queued up for seats in the Senate gallery in anticipation of the vote on HB 30, the anti-Semitism bill that had stalled in the Senate since last year.
The Jewish community has a moment of heightened anxiety because of the increase of anti-Semitism in the United States and around the world.
Backers of the bill said increased incidents targeting Georgia's Jewish communities justify broadening the state's hate crimes bill, with specific language to include anti-Semitism. Democrat Gloria Butler says the Jewish community deserved her yes vote.
And in every moment, black people or women asked for equality. The Jewish community stood hand in hand with us.
But critics fretted that the bill would chill legitimate speech criticizing the state of Israel.
You said it's a hate that mutates.
Correct.
So your belief then is that the definition of anti-Semitism can necessarily change. Is that correct?
It's not just my belief. It is the commonly accepted understanding in both the Jewish and academic worlds.
Okay.
This isn't, okay? As I said, that's why I quoted, this is a quote. It's a great thing from Lord Sachs, Jonathan Sachs. It's a great thing from Nihilecka. This is just accepted as the understanding of, a cultural anthropologist.
So I would just say off the bat, I do not accept that definitions can just mutate. That is something that I could debate that on, like the definition of a woman. I mean, and I'm saying not just about Jewish people. I think that we have to have a concrete definition to work with, because then you can just update and say, actually, I've changed that, and now this is what constitutes anti-Semitism.
But Candace, that is the horror of anti-Semitism. So what you are saying to me is that anti-Semitism is this and does not change. What I am saying to you is that the entire world and scholars about anti-Semitism recognize that it is a unique hate. That if you define it as that Jews should not be able to exist collectively, okay, as a collective. They shouldn't have that right. That changes from the Middle Ages with religion, the 18th through 20th centuries about race, and then after Israel's created, it's a hatred based on the nation. And until that is understood, that it is, this isn't something that's really questioned about among academics, theologians, Jewish scholars. I'm not presenting it. This is why I thought that I'm so optimistic about a dialogue. But I think part of it is you view that the hate can't mutate. And what I'm trying to tell you is that we have 2,000 years of history that demonstrate the exact opposite.
So, and I'm going to just push back just gently here. For me personally, if I thought that racism could just be an ever-shifting definition based on the experience of Black people, it would be a remarkable power, and I would be able to create something like B.A.M, which could say that everything was racist. So I am not going to be able to agree that definition should be able to transform according to what's happening during the day. But here's what I will say. If you could, just because I think it's really important for us to get to going through this article, because then you might be able to explain why you view it as anti-Semitism. If you could just give us what you are saying the current definition of anti-Semitism is today, that would be very helpful.
The current definition of anti-Semitism today has to do with what the feelings are. The current definition of anti-Semitism today has to do with what the feelings are. The current definition of anti-Semitism today has to do with what the feelings
are. Okay, then you go on to talk about me attacking Rabbi Shmuley. My audience has already seen him attacking me over the last 2 years. And I'm just going to ask you a basic question. Does a Black person or any person have a right to defend themselves?
Absolutely.
Okay, because that is interesting, because Rabbi Shmuley and his daughter have attacked me and made videos of me for 2 years straight. I have responded once, and you're basically saying that I'm anti-Semitic for responding. So I want your perception of when it is that a Black person's allowed to respond.
So, Candace, first of all, I know Shmuley peripherally. We've probably met a half a dozen times. Okay? He is an incredibly knowledgeable man. He formed L'Chaim Society at Oxford. Incredibly knowledgeable man. And with 9 kids, right? And we have something in Judaism, predates Christianity, but it's also Christianity as well to an extent, called Lashon Hara, the evil tongue. That to gossip, to say certain things like that is really a huge avera. It's a huge sin. It's a huge chait. I don't know all the things that he has said about you. I do know he's called you an anti-Semite, and so have I. That's not a personal attack on you and your family. For you to call a man who is extremely knowledgeable an unholy rabbi and his hag daughter, forgetting about what he may or may not have done, if he's attacked you personally, if he's said whatever horrific things about you personally, that you are a blankety, 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 blank, he's wrong. If he's attacked you or your children or your family, your mother, for you to, rather than comment on whatever he's done, to call him an unholy rabbi, that is way out of line. You don't even know what a rabbi is supposed to do.
So let me ask you a question. Do you view that as anti-Semitic for me to respond? So it's okay, so he can attack me for 2 years. Is he a racist, just to be clear?
I don't know when he attacks you, so I can't comment.
So what if I say that the definition of racism changes, and if you attack a Black person, you're a racist?
Depends. Candace, you don't get to get away with that. It depends how it changes.
No, I'm asking, because at the beginning of this discussion, you did say that you can't tell a Black person. It's been 2 years consistently of him and his daughter attacking me, saying that.
I wasn't there. I'm asking you. I'm asking all.
Okay, but if you're saying that you weren't there, why would you put this into writing? Isn't it incumbent upon you to research what's happened before you start saying to me that defending myself is anti-Semitic? Isn't it incumbent upon you to research what's happened before you start saying to me that defending myself is anti-Semitic?
Isn't it incumbent upon you to research what's happened before you start saying to me that defending myself is anti-Semitic?
Candace, if he attacked you personally, if he said you were a black fill in the blank, then he should be reprimanded that, but it doesn't justify what you did. You don't know what a rabbi does. You don't know our theology. How dare you call him an unholy rabbi? How dare you go into the misogynistic, the anti-Semitic trope of his hag daughter, something used throughout the late 18th and early through the early 20th century.
Sorry, hag is now anti-Semitic?
So that is a term of his hag daughter that goes back into the witches of Eastern Europe. Why did you have to call her a hag daughter?
Just to be clear, because she's a witch. I think she's a witch. That's not because she's Jewish. I would call someone a hag of any color. I think she's a witch. What they have done over the last 2 years, I believe his daughter is a hag. I said that because that's what I believe. You may disagree with me on that, but to say that that's anti-Semitic is ridiculous. I would call any person a hag.
Candace, I'm going to be very clear without trying to be insulting. So please forgive me if it comes off wrong. Okay, it's not meant to.
No, it's fine. You can insult me.
I don't want to.
I've dealt with 2 years of a rabbi insulting me, so I'm totally cool with this. Yeah.
I have no desire to insult anybody. Okay? But do you understand, are you familiar with the history of the Grimm fairy tales and the folk tales of Eastern Europe?
I know that we can go back and we can also say
No. I'm asking a specific question.
Okay.
That the witch archetype of those fairy tales were specifically modeled and called the Jews. That the Jews of that part of the world were called hags and witches specifically because they didn't eat the same food. They had different practices, and they were excluded that way as part of the bloodline.
So you are saying that we can
by calling a rabbi's daughter a witch, a hag daughter, you have tapped into an anti-Semitic trope that goes back hundreds of years, whether you mean to or not.
Okay.
Now that I've told you that,
yeah.
Okay, do you think maybe there are better words to call her than a hag daughter?
I'm actually not going to edit my language for two people that have been attacking me for 2 years. And so what I'm going to say is that, and I want to be very strong on this. I am not going to be told whether you want to dress it up as anti-Semitism, you want to dress it up as that I cannot respond and defend myself. I'm certainly not going to be told that I need to be contained in how I respond after 2 years of consistent attacks from two individuals. So I want to just say on that point, you and I will never come to an agreement. I stand by everything that I said about him, and I'm not going to have that everything that I say, including yesterday, when he says that me finding the products and stuff that he sells and promotes as a rabbi to be unholy, to say that I am only saying that because it's made in Israel.
Kosher sex, on the cover you see it's great sex is a calculated performance, and kosher sex is a total submission to instinct, where you just let yourself go.
Hi everyone, out of an abundance of gratitude to our friend and brother Muhammad Ijab, who debated me on Piers Morgan. Millions of people watched it. Intimacy Company with Hannah runs based on my book. He gave us international promotion, and in recognition, what are we doing for him?
So we're gonna have the Muhammad Hijab discount, and you can put in the promo code at the end of checkout.
And as you check out, if you're buying a vibrator, he kept on bringing up vibrators in the debate. If you're buying lubricants, he kept on bringing up lubricants. Hannah, in the regular classes that you and I do and the advice we give people writing in, a lot of them are men who are dealing with a lot of aggression in their lives, a lot of false machismo. They know that they're
overcompensating.
They're overcompensating, and they're overcompensating because they feel that they're kind of miniature in a physical department, when they really should not feel bad about that.
I actually did a post on this.
Sex in Judaism provides the most intimate way of knowing someone, and I think especially in marriage, it's very hard to maintain lust. And so I wanted products to bring to people that don't substitute their husband or their wife. It's something that can enhance the experience.
Let's say a lesbian or a gay couple come in, is there a different message for them? Because I know some religious groups might not be so accepting.
Anyone who believes in commitment and bring love into this world and being intimate with someone and wants to learn, they're welcome here. It does say in the Torah that there are issues with homosexuality, but you know, my dad, we were always brought up with the idea that if, you know, there's 613 mitzvot for everyone to keep, and if you can't keep one, you keep this, or two, or whatever it is, whatever number, you keep the rest and you do as much as you can. That's Judaism.
What it looks like to a lot of people, and I'm going to tell you this, and I'm expressing this in case you are an individual, as I'm sure you are, that is concerned about the rise of anti-Semitism. But my suspicion is that people that are watching this are going to think that now we are using the word anti-Semitism like BLM began using racism, right? Which is to say that you cannot, let me finish my statement. I'm just telling you what I am going, this is my suspicion. And I have tons of Jewish listeners, but given what you've said about Dave Smith, who is a libertarian, he is not a far left liberal. He just does not support what Israel is doing. So in this, you have said that Jewish people, you've made comments about a lot of Jewish people who maybe don't agree with what's happening in Israel. You are now saying that a person who's been attacked for 2 years still needs to be careful in how they approach a Jewish person that's been doing the attacking. No one is going to accept that. That's ridiculous. And then to say this particular word, it sounds like everything that anybody says, it needs to be first need to weigh it against the feelings of somebody and their history. I could find examples of black people being called witches. I can't then say that nobody can ever call a black person a witch, you know, even if it has what happened in Salem. You could go on, right? But the point is that if you're a black person, you've been attacked over 2 years, I don't care if a person calls them a rabbi. In fact, I would question what it means to be a rabbi. Maybe you can explain. If you have been consistently attacking and threatening somebody, literally, he gave a quote to the Jerusalem Post, which actually I like the Jerusalem Post. They report on things very accurately, in which he says that he wants to bankrupt Candace Owens. That is a direct threat to somebody's livelihood. It is despicable. And because you call yourself a rabbi, it does not mean that people cannot say that it is pointedly ridiculous that you are using finances as a mode of threat against people because you don't like their speech. It is ridiculous. And let me tell you what, that leans into an anti-Semitic trope about Jewish people and money. For a rabbi to stand up and say, let's bankrupt her.
You can talk over me all day. You can scream.
I'm not screaming. I've let you talk a lot. That's not fair. I've let you talk a lot.
To all my Jewish friends, my Jewish brothers and sisters, stand tall. Stand tall. Do not let this fear, this sadness, this anxiety, and this dread overwhelm you. Draw strength from your family, from your friends, from your ancestors, and the worldwide bond that we share that has always put the battery in your back. We're used to being looked at as different because that's what we are. We are different, and that's a good thing. I know that Jews are looked at as weak, but we're stronger than you can imagine. That's why you hurl propaganda that we control all the money, we control the media, because it's plausible. It's plausible because we're just that good. Smart, compassionate, moral, and strong people. And we need to stand taller than ever against all those sick, dumb, uneducated black tar in their blood who hate Jews because they ain't. You hate us because you ain't us.
What is anti-Semitism? What is anti-Semitism? This is a publication on StateGov about anti-Semitism. This is what it says. Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews. Rhetorically and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed toward Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. Contemporary examples of anti-Semitism: calling for, aiding, or justifying the killing or harming of Jews. In other words, often in the name of a radical ideology or an extremist view of religion, making mendacious, dehumanizing, demonizing, or stereotypical allegations about Jews as such, or the power of Jews as a collective, especially, but not exclusively, the myth about a world Jewish conspiracy or of Jews controlling the media, economy, government, or societal institutions, accusing Jews as a people of being responsible for real or imagined wrongdoing committed by a single Jewish person or group, the state of Israel, or even for acts committed by non-Jews, accusing the Jews as a people or Israel as a state of inventing or exaggerating the Holocaust, accusing Jewish citizens of being more loyal to Israel or to the alleged priorities of Jews worldwide than to the interests of their own nations.
The current definition of anti-Semitism today has to do with what the feelings are. The current definition of anti-Semitism today has to do with what the feelings are. The current definition of anti-Semitism today has to do with what the feelings are.
The first thing you really need to know is that the Israelites of the Old Testament are not these Jewish people. They're imposters, to put it bluntly. They're pretending to be the people of the Most High, and they're benefiting from it greatly. I mean, America's sending them billions and billions of dollars every year. The UK is doing the same. Other countries are doing the same, because there's a line in the Old Testament that says, you know, those who bless Israel will be blessed. So won't they be surprised when they realize they're blessing the wrong people? And more than that, they've been a curse to the real people. So who are the real people? They are the so-called African Americans, the Caribbeans, the West Africans. They're one nation of people. Now, a lot of people will say, oh no, it can't be these black people. The Israelites of the Bible weren't black. Well, let's just have a look at it, shall we? The Israelites stem from one of the sons of Noah called Shem. And one of Shem's sons was called Elam. And we have depictions of what the Elamites looked like. This is one of those depictions. And they are black people. So all of Shem's sons were black people. The line that ultimately led to King David was Arphaxad, right? So that line were black people. More than that, we can actually go into archaeology and history and look at all the skeletons that were left after the Assyrians took over the city of Lachish. The skulls that were found at that site were a particular type of skull known as dolichocephalic skulls, which actually match that of the Negro. White people's skulls are called brachiocephalic, but none of those were found at that site. Just looking at the depiction of these Israelites, I think it was found in Assyria. I can't remember where this was found. But again, that depiction looks like a modern Negro. So to go to the first of the prophecies, the first and the last, as it were, it's Genesis 15:13. And he said unto Abram, know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. So 400 years of slavery infliction that ended just recently. So how do we know that it ended just recently? Because most people look at that and say, oh, that refers to Egypt. But no, actually, if you actually look in the Old Testament, it will tell you that the most that they could have stayed in Egypt was around about 350 years. That's the absolute most.
Protests going on here in the Kol, in the heart of Jerusalem, because the Messianic Jewish Alliance is gathered, and believers from all over Israel are gathered in the pavilion to lift up the name of Yeshua. And that's not really welcomed by a lot of people here in Israel. That's not really understood by the ultra-Orthodox community. And we love our Jewish brothers and sisters. We love these people. But the reality is that they don't see Yeshua as the Messiah. A couple years ago, we were here in the same place, and they yelled, Yeshua is dead, and different things in Hebrew. There was tear gas. I'm grateful that tonight there hasn't been any overt violence. People are yelling, people are... And so I just want to ask you if you would join me in praying for there to be restoration in this land, that the Abraham, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob would be worshipped in the place.
Veil was torn in two from top to bottom. That veil, according to the Josephus, was 4 inches thick. This wasn't we used the term veil. We visualized something sort of gossamer. No, this was a tapestry, heavy tapestry kind of thing. It was torn from top to bottom. And of course, the Hebrews 10 makes a big issue of all of that. I should mention something here as we talk about this. There is very little relationship between what we're seeing here, which is Mosaic Judaism, and Talmudic or Rabbinic Judaism. The Judaism today, which you would properly call Talmudic Judaism or Rabbinic Judaism, has very little connection to the Bible, to the Torah. They'd be offended by that, but frankly, see, the problem they have, they've lost the temple for 1900 years. And that leaves them in a dilemma. Because the Torah, Leviticus 17:11, says that without the shedding of blood, there's no remission of sins. Well, where can they shed blood? There's no altar, there's no temple. They got a problem. They can't cling to the old ways because the old ways are not available to them. So they have redefined and rationalized a man-centered, good works system of appeasement, prayer and charity and penance and so forth. But that's the Talmudic Judaism. The Mosaic Judaism is at an end because the fulfillment of that was Jesus Christ. So they're in a bind. They either accept Jesus the Messiah, and that's called what we call, use the term Messianic Jew, or completed Jew, as some people like to say, in the sense that he's found his Messiah. Or you embrace Talmudic Judaism, which is a rationalization that's distant from the original text. It leans heavily on the impressions and interpretations of generations of brilliant but misguided rabbis. Anyway, let's move on to Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles. And the Lord spake unto Moses.
We've always known throughout history that if Christians knew what was in the Talmud, it would make Christians very angry. And so the Jews were able to conceal a lot of their most blasphemous statements about the Lord Jesus Christ because people didn't speak Hebrew.
Here's what they say about Jesus in the Talmud. There's sections in there about Jesus. In fact, there's an entire book that's been written by the director of Judaic Studies in Princeton University, Dr. Schaefer, a Jew. He's written a book, Jesus in the Talmud.
The Talmud. Keep in mind that the Talmud was written hundreds of years after Christ lived. And so it has references about Jesus in it, and they are hateful, blasphemous references.
According to the Talmud, Jesus was the product of adultery, the bastard son of Mary and a Roman soldier named Pantera. He spent his early life in Egypt, where he learned black magic, idolatry, and sorcery.
Jesus was born to a whore. Mary was a whore. She had sexual relations with many men. The father was a Roman centurion.
The Talmud further blasphemes the Lord Jesus by calling him a fool and comparing him with Old Testament villains such as Balaam, Ahithophel, Doeg, and Gehazi.
Does the Talmud talk about the Jews killing Jesus? Or
vaguely, but Maimonides believes that the Jews killed him, that the Jews executed him because of certain of his doctrines and so forth.
Do you believe that the Jews killed Jesus?
It's possible the Jews did kill Jesus.
Right.
So let's say they did. Right? Maybe he deserved to die. Maybe he was a troublemaker. Let's assume we did. So we killed somebody.
The Talmud actually gloats about Jesus dying young. The passage reads, "Hast thou heard how old Balaam was? He replied, Bloody and deceitful men shall not live out half their days. It follows that he was 33 or 34 years old." And you say, wait, that passage says Balaam, not Jesus. But look at the footnote at the bottom of the page. Balaam is frequently used in the Talmud as a type of Jesus. Not only that, but in the Jewish Encyclopedia, Volume 2, page 469, under Balaam it says, Balaam given to Jesus in Sanhedrin 106b and Gittin 57a.
Peter Schaefer states in his book, Jesus in the Talmud, that there can be no doubt that the narrative of the execution in the Talmud refers to Jesus. In fact, the book states, there is no reason to feel ashamed because we rightfully executed a blasphemer and idolater. Jesus deserved death. And
denotatively, let's stand back and ask ourselves a very fundamental question to put this in a broader context. What is your most important stewardship? Some would say the family, certainly more than finances. I'm going to suggest that your most important stewardship is the battle for your heart. That's really the issue, the larger issue that we're going to be dealing with. Paul warned his protege Timothy in his second letter, says, know also that in the last days perilous times shall come. For men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasures more than the lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. From such, turn away. Indeed, this is one of the fundamental signs that we are clearly moving into the last days. And there is a path to oblivion, I'll call it. And clearly it starts by being in a society that's committed to secularism. Clearly we live in a culture which maintains there really is no God. And from that conviction, or lack thereof, comes the view that there is no truth. We live in a time when truth is relative. You have your truth, I have mine kind of thing. And Alan Bloom highlighted the fact that if you don't believe in an absolute truth, that puts a total valuelessness to history. Then we wonder why in the universities our young people have no real interest in the great ideas of the past, because the quest for truth would be futile. There is no real truth. We each have our own. It's interesting, Isaiah warned us of this. People ask me, where is America in the Bible? And I say very clearly in Isaiah chapter 5, with the 6 woes. But the most typical one I'll highlight here, where Isaiah says, woe unto them that call evil good, and good evil, and put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe unto them that are wise in their own eyes, and prudent in their own sight. So clearly, value relativism is what we're facing. That turns out to lead to the materialism we all experience. If there is no truth, then we become self-absorbed. The most important thing in our lives is ourselves. We are in the me generation. You can go to the book stands and find magazines to self, we, me, and so on. And this self-absorption, of course, is basically a form of materialism. He that has the most toys wins, or velocity makes any road seem right. The answer in our lives is to get more stuff. And clearly, materialism finds itself, sooner or later, bankrupt for lots of reasons. First of all, we'll discover even in the scientific realm, we find ourselves on very shaky foundations. And of course, also materialism leads to moral bankruptcy. So what we're facing here, all of us, is what actually is an epistemological challenge. Epistemology is the study of knowledge, its scope and limits. And we really are in a quest for understanding truth. Where do we get real knowledge? Furthermore, those of us that are biblically informed recognize that we also face this quest under conditions of a hostile adversary. An adversary whose primary weapons are deceit and disinformation. And so the study of knowledge, its scope and limits is the broad thing. And the reason this is important to every one of us is Jesus Christ gave us a challenge, an imperative, a command. He said, be not deceived. He said that several times. Okay, great. How do we do that? What are our tools to prevent being deceived? So as we look at epistemology, and of course that's a very vacant study because it's generally taught in philosophy classes in universities, and it really becomes a massaging of definitions. But clearly most of the debate in epistemology had to do with does knowledge come from reason or from experience? And the rationalists, of course, committed themselves to deductive reasoning, Descartes, Spinoza, Leibniz being perhaps typical of the rationalists, but soon superseded by the empiricists, saying that tangible evidence is the key to it, Francis Bacon, John Locke, and others. And that, of course, led to the scientific method, the rise of modern science, and that's committed itself to empirical validation, that what we really know is what we can empirically, experimentally validate. Except it's interesting, as we look back now at the history of science, it has actually quite a list of dismal failures. There was a time when phlogiston was a theory of combustion. And of course, that was shredded by Lavoisier, the father of modern chemistry. Then we had this theory about ether between heavenly bodies that, of course, was shattered by the Michelson-Morley experiment. And then we had the nebular hypothesis that the planets came out of the sun. This is still taught in most astronomy classes. It was invented by Swedenborg. Swedenborg was an occultist, and he sold the idea to Laplace, who did not check the math, who endorsed it, and then Kant took it and popularized it, and it's still taught today, even though with any knowledge of orbital mechanics, it's easily shredded because you've got 98% of the mass in the sun, and you've got 98% of the angular momentum in the planets, and turns out when you try to reconcile that, there's no way the planets came out of the sun mathematically. The nebula hypothesis, again, lacks empirical validation. Then we get into the whole area of the paradoxical nature of light. J.J. Thomson got the Nobel Prize for proving that photons were a stream of particles in 1906. His son, in 1937, got the Nobel Prize for proving that that light was actually a wave phenomenon. And so the paradoxical nature of light continues. And then, of course, we had the Setterfield-Norman hypothesis that light is not a constant, but slowing down. That was laughed at by physicists for several decades, and now recently is being confirmed through experiments. So even empirical science has its failures. And so that leaves us with some still pending enigmas. Do you realize that most of what we know about matter comes from a small sample? Scientists know that there's matter. Most of the matter in the universe is not visible. It's dark. It doesn't give off light. And they're searching for it, dark matter. What's astonishing is dark matter, as they call it, constitutes about 95% of the matter in the universe. So what we know about neutrons, protons, and so forth comes actually from a small sample. Then we get into microbiology with DNA. And we discover that the DNA is edited. When you make an RNA copy, you edit parts of it out and take the parts you need to code up proteins. And the parts that are coded and left out, or extrons as they call them, are labeled in your textbooks as junk DNA. They assume it's just vestiges of a past evolutionary cycle or something. Well, now they discover that the junk DNA, as it's called in the textbooks, actually has value. It contains architectural information. But the shocking thing is, do you realize how much of the DNA is labeled junk DNA? Over 98%. So again, we could use some humility in these things. And then we get to particle physics, which absolutely pulls the rug out from under the foundations of science itself. Because we suddenly have the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, misapplied by many philosophers to other things, but basically it turns out certain things behave differently if they're being observed. And then we have the laws of causality. The idea of cause and effect, which is the primary handmaiden of science, is now shattered in the field of quantum physics. And then we discover that subatomic particles lack a property called locality. That all photons, it's been experimentally confirmed, apparently, that all photons know what all other photons in the universe are doing instantaneously. These concepts totally shatter the philosophical foundations. That's one reason why Boltzmann committed suicide, one of the early pioneers, because he recognized the philosophical implications of quantum physics. But as you grab this, then you suddenly discover the thing we call reality is actually a digital simulation, that our so-called reality is just virtual. So this is causing even philosophical foundations being shattered. So as we go through and we look at materialism, which has shaky material foundations and of course leads to moral bankruptcy, we experience that in our society. What is the next bridge to cross? Where do people go that have committed themselves to materialism and discover it's found wanting? And the answer is predictable, although surprising. And that is, we have the death of the soul. We have a lost generation, a generation without God. An emptiness of life that you see in all quarters, all pursuits. And guilty as part of this is the impact of the media, which presents perception rather than reality as the real pursuit in reality. And this leads to desensitizing our emotions, and both individually and culturally, leading us to what some people would call an emptiness of the times, a spiritual vacuum which sets us up for the ultimate delusion, the spirit of the Antichrist. And so we're seeing this in rather apocalyptic terms. Well, so where do we go from materialism? We go to mysticism. People are asking, is there anybody out there? It's astonishing to find people in this age of rationalism flocking to various forms of mysticism. Pagan Babylonian mysticism that we have repackaged as the New Age, Christian Gnosticism, as exemplified by some of the novels and so forth that are popular today. But also, one of the strangest forms of this is Jewish mysticism in the form of the Kabbalah. And so when you talk about mysticism, by the way, it embraces a lot of related topics. Metaphysics, of course, is simply the basic nature or structure of being. And that, incidentally, in Russia is a subdivision of the field of physics, a little differently than we organize ourselves in this country. Cosmology, of course, is the study of the origin of the universe, and most mysticisms focus on this issue, among others. And they generally are regarded as theosophies, systems of conjectures into the divine nature and so forth. And occultism is, of course, the study or attempt to control supernatural powers. And theurgy is a very similar term, compelling or persuading supernatural powers. Many people's approach to prayer is really theurgy. And of course, all of this is also embraces magic, both black as well as so-called white magic and so on. But mysticism is simply the attempt to try to establish direct contact to the divine. And it embraces all of these things in various ways. But the Kabbalah is the one that we're going to sort of focus on in these sessions, which has a number of elements. Esotericism is part of it, that there are secrets, truth, that are relegated to the inside group, only the elite, only those that are really on the inside can embrace the real truth. And of course, it also includes Gnosticism, Greek, Christian, and also mixed very much with, strangely enough, Muslim superstitions. And it obviously is primarily focused on theosophy, the nature of the divine nature. And what's strange about the Kabbalah is that there's this paradoxical convergence between intuition or conjectures on the one hand and tradition on the other. It's a strange mix of both. And so the earliest forms of this, of course, in the first centuries AD, were a variant on Hellenistic beliefs from Pythagoras and others. And the medieval Spanish Kabbalah, which is where it really flowered, was based on Neoplatonism and Gnosticism, and what a great preoccupation with language. Symbolic language in the sense of the alphabet, the Hebrew alphabet obviously specifically, and numbers. And the whole idea that the creation itself was a result of language, thoughts expressed that became the creation. So they really regard a very, very special relationship between reality and the way it's expressed in both letters and numbers. And so one of the things that's going on, and one reason we're pursuing some understanding of this area, is because of its strange popularity among celebrities. There are many articles being written about Madonna, Demi Moore, and many others here listed that have publicly identified themselves with a form of Kabbalah that is popular in Hollywood. And it's very strange that people with resources, people that have the opportunity to really find out the truth, are flocking to these forms of expression. And so our agenda in these two sessions will be to take a quick snapshot of the history of Judaism. We use that term very loosely, failing to really understand how it has changed through the years, how it has refocused itself. Mosaic Judaism has been redefined. Most of us think of Judaism as belief in the Old Testament, but it turns out that they went through a crisis and redefined it. And what we really mean by Judaism today is Talmudic Judaism and the era that followed its publication, so-called Geonic era, and out of which emerged this strange form of mysticism called the Kabbalah. And out of that came Hasidism, Most of us are familiar with the ultra-Orthodox in the Crown Heights district of Brooklyn and so forth that still cling to 18th century Eastern European cultural standards. But the Hasidism actually emerged out of the Kabbalah. And so we have a challenge here that's actually an epistemological challenge. And we want to understand, how does this fit in to what I'll call the path to oblivion? How do we prevent ourselves from being deceived by things that would seem to be very appealing? And what tools do we have to avoid being deceived? And so let's just jump in. We're hoping not to offend anyone. Our sources for the materials here lean very heavily on Gershom Scholem, who is acknowledged as one of the experts. He was a professor of Kabbalah at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem from 1923 through 1965, and his books are considered quite authoritative to those that are in the Kabbalah. Encyclopedia Judaica with 17 volumes has much to say on this, and of course so does Britannica and Carta and the other standard resources, and some of this has also been influenced by personal interviews, both in the Safed area in Israel, rabbis there, as well as here in the U.S., and so that's will give you the best perceptions we can. Mosaic Judaism, of course, as we might perceive it by studying the books of Moses and the Old Testament, had a crisis, of course, with the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. The Jewish leadership had rejected Jesus Christ as the Messiah, and on the heels of that, just as Jesus predicted, the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, a major national calamity. That led to the Council of Yamnia in 90 AD. The Greek translation of the Jewish scriptures that had been done 3 centuries earlier had become really the Christian's Bible, and that caused much consternation in the Jewish community and led, in effect, to steps that ultimately developed the Masoretic text some centuries later. But from the Council of Yamnia and so forth, they're starting to redefine Judaism. They have a major problem in Judaism. Mosaic Judaism, it was built all around the notion that without the shedding of blood, there's no remission of sins. Well, suddenly they have no temple, no altar, and there's no place to shed blood. What do they do about sin? And this has caused a lot of debate and so forth, but the net of it is to redefine Judaism in terms of what we would call good works, to reconcile themselves with God by living exemplary lives and focusing on conduct and that sort of thing. And that led, of course, to the pulling together of the Talmud, Talmudic Judaism. And one of the things that characterizes Talmudic Judaism is the veneration of the great scholars that are involved, even above the text that they're expositing. And so we have, out of Talmudic Judaism will come the Kabbalah some centuries later, and Hasidism, and we'll go through that. But as we reflect on the 1st and 2nd century then, Judaism is going through a major redefinition and a crisis, and so is Christianity. This is the rise of the Gnostics, people who had all kinds of conjectures about the reality that were quite non-biblical. Many tried to reconcile those two, and Gnosticism also was esoteric, limited to the insiders and so forth. And many of the New Testament epistles were written to rebut Gnosticism, Colossians and others, and the epistles of John. And so by the time you get to the 3rd century following, we have the pulling together in the Jewish community of the Talmud. There are 2 Talmuds, the Jerusalem Talmud and the Babylonian Talmud, both occurring from the 3rd through the 5th centuries. The Babylonian Talmud, interestingly enough, is regarded as the authoritative one because it's the academy that produced it there in Babylon survived the others by some years. So we have following that then the whole codification of Jewish civil and religious law, recognizing they were not limited to the written laws, the books of Moses, but they also incorporated what they call the oral tradition, laws that were handed down verbally. And so we have the Mishnah, which is the codified laws, and the Gemara, which is the commentary on the Mishnah. And then it's in 4 parts. And then the Halakha, which deals with the disputed legal questions. As time went on, the various highly venerated rabbis ruled on various issues that came up, and that embodies the Halakha. And then the Haggadah, which is the illustrations and anecdotal examples of the application of the laws. But these 4 elements really constitute the Talmud. And there are 2 compilations of it: the Jerusalem Talmud from the 3rd to the 5th century, and the Babylonian Talmud from the 3rd to the 6th century. And between the two, the Babylonian Talmud is regarded as the more authoritative, and because the academies in Babylon survived the Palestinian academies by several centuries. And the era that follows this then is called the Geonic era, Geon being a sage or a highly venerated scholar. And there's a period then from this time through about the 12th century that is regarded as the Geonic era. The Halakha is the rabbinical interpretation, and they supplement the scriptures of the Torah. The Torah is highly venerated, and yet there's much that they observe that really is based on oral traditions rather than the writings that we would consider inspired writings of Moses and following. And so there's a tendency, as the history unfolds, for the Jews to venerate the rabbis even above the root texts. And the Haggadah is the illustrations and amplifications of all kinds of issues, ethical, political, as well as religious issues that are involved in the laws. And so from the 7th through the 11th century, you have a period that's alluded to as the Geonic era, has its heroes and so forth. In this period, there's an interesting group of people that emerge from the 8th century on in Tsarist Russia. And they're called Karaites, from the Hebrew verb kara, which means to read. These are people within the Jewish community that insisted upon staying strictly to the laws of Moses and the Torah. And they rejected the Talmud and the other rabbinical traditions that surrounded it. And during the first 6 centuries of AD, that it accumulated. What's interesting to me about this is that the Karaites in Russia were exempted by the Tsar from the double taxation that the Jewish community had in general, and from the pogroms. As you may know, during the Tsarist era, there were repeated purgings and oppressions of the Jewish community. But that was, I didn't realize, we're focused on the Talmudic communities, not the Karaites. And they were considered heretical by the Orthodox Jews, but exempted from the abuses that the Talmudic Jews were experiencing. And I find that very provocative. But anyway, as you get to the 12th and 13th century, this is where the Kabbalah, as it's commonly mentioned today, emerges. And the word Kabbalah actually simply means received tradition. And the word is used differently in different contexts. In the Talmud, that term occurs in 2 different senses. It occurs to refer to those portions of the scripture that are not Torah, the prophets and the Hagiographa, in other words, the non-Torah passages. It's also used simply to indicate those things that are traditions and handed down by a teacher, by family traditions. So the term Kabbalah has a connotative use prior to the 11th and 12th century. But today, that term really focuses on the mystic and esoteric doctrines of Judaism. It's used in a different sense altogether. Generically, it's used of Jewish mysticism in all its forms, but specifically, when it's used denotatively, it refers to a very specific esoteric theosophy that crystallized in the 13th century, primarily in Spain and southern France. And its primary document is primarily best summarized, perhaps, by a book called the Book of Splendor, the Sefer HaZohar, or Zohar for short. It's generated primarily the main mystical movements in Judaism. You can wallow through many, there's just dozens of major books, written literature, that emerge impacting the Kabbalah. Here's a couple of the major ones. There's the Sefer Yetzirah, which is the book of creation. And what it focuses on is this whole idea of the 10 Sephirot. The word Sephirot is like emanations. And it's preoccupied with 2 things, the decimal system with the 10 Sephirot, which I'll come to in a little bit, and it also makes a big thing of the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. The 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet are provocative in many ways because they're not just phonetic letters like most alphabets. Each letter carries a idea or concept behind it. In fact, if you understand the concept behind each of the letters, most words in Hebrew are based on a 3-letter root. You can infer, if you know the alphabet properly, you can infer what the words mean. It's a very different kind of alphabet. But the mystics, those that are steeped in the Kabbalah, believe that the letters actually have magical power, in effect. There's another document that becomes very pivotal in its history, and that's the Sefer HaBahir, which is the Book of Brightness. And this, among other things, starts to develop the idea that there's an equivalence between the history of Israel and the goings-on in the Godhead itself, especially between Israel and the Shekinah, which is always portrayed in mysticism as a feminine side of God. And it also, from this, develops then the whole notion that the obedience of Israel is a determining factor in establishing or reestablishing cosmic harmony, even to the inner life of the Godhead. So we start getting into some very bizarre interconnections here, from the behavior of Israel individually and collectively to the welfare, if you will, of what's going on in the inner life of the Godhead. So this mysticism is obviously far-reaching in its conjectures and so forth. But the dominant document of all these is the Sefer HaZohar. You'll hear everybody talking about the Zohar. It was penned over a 30-year period by Moses de Leon. He attributed it. In order to give it. He wrote many books, but to give his views here more weight, he attributed the Zohar to a legendary rabbi, a 2nd century rabbi, Shimon bar Yochai, and subsequent evidence has definitely established this de Leon as the author. But this document had far-reaching influence on Judaism for over 600 years. And it presents the Godhead as a dynamic flow of force, the unknowable Ein Sof, the highest concept here in the Zohar and in Kabbalistic mysticism is the Ein Sof. It's the unknowable, non-finite one. It actually is viewed as some kind of divine nothingness, out of which flow emanations in 10 forms. And the knowable attributes of the Godhead emanate in 10 sephirot, which are realms or planes. And this leads to mountains of literature speculating on how all these things interrelate. And Israel's history, including its life in exile, become symbols of the inner life of God. They start to see everything that's going on in Israel. Its expulsion from Spain in 1492 is a huge milestone. As the Spanish Kabbalah then gets distributed, as they left Spain, they reestablish themselves elsewhere. But there's a strange mystical parallelism between what's happening to Israel and what's really going on in the Godhead. And that starts to lead to the idea that Israel's behavior, the behavior of the faithful in Israel, are crucial to the destiny of the Godhead itself. So you get into some very strange inversions going on here. And now the emanations of this Ein Sof, forces of the divine essence, the tree of life is what it's sometimes called. And there's much speculation on what these various 10 elements really involve and how they interact. At the top of the heap is the Keter Elyon, the supreme crown. This is its identity and the identity of Ein Sof, the unknowable deity, is sort of problematical because this is not Ein Sof, this is only part of it, and yet it's at the top of the heap. So there's some ambiguity of how you discern the difference between those two. But then you get to the Chokmah, which is the term for wisdom. This is the location of the primordial ideas of God. And the Binah, which is the intelligence, the organizing principle of the universe, is in the Binah. And these become, you see, the rubrics by which all this literature evolves over the centuries. And the fourth one is the Gedulah, or greatness, or in some renderings of it, the Hesed, or love, the attribute of goodness in any case. And then we have the Gevurah, which is the power, in some renderings, the din or judgment. It's the attribute of the severity of God. So you've got love on the one hand and severity, and there's a tension, it would seem, between those two. And then you have the tension between is resolved with Tifereth, which is beauty, or in some renderings, compassion, as they reconcile the severity and the love and so forth. They deal with these terms. And the Tifereth is sort of the median principle between the previous two. And then you have the Nezach, which is lasting endurance, or a term for eternity, if you will. And the Hot, which is the majesty of God. And the Tzaddik, which is the righteous one, or Yesod Olam, and others, the foundation of the world. It's the foundation of all the powers of God, presumably. This is all leading to God's manifestation, which is yet to be seen, coming down here, where we have the Malkut, which is the kingdom, or the diadem, or the presence, the kingship, sometimes also expressed as the Shekinah, the presence of God. And so these 10 elements then constitute the basic pillars of most of the literature of the Kabbalah, as they speculate on how these things interact and how they're in turn impacted by what's going on in the life of Israel and in the creation itself. In fact, they even have renderings of these things in terms of mankind, in terms of they reflect back. If God created man in his own image, then in some sense God is the image of man, and so they reflect that back, and these issues then start to get very anthropomorphized in their dealings. So now the discipline of the Kabbalah, of course, includes all kinds of meditative practices that promise to enable individuals to share and participate in the nature of God's being. And this is where this gets very, very occultic. The Kabbalistic disciplines were recognized as being limited to a rarefied elite. Kabbalistic communities soon developed all around a particular leader or tzaddik, and who was, in many cases, regarded as one doing mysteries, doing magic by expressing various expressions from so the Kabbalah gets very, very occultic. By the time you get to the 16th century, so it started in the 11th, 12th, 13th, as you get to the 16th century, it takes a whole other turn through the leader of a guy by the name of Rabbi Isaac Luria. And you run into what's called Lurianic Kabbalah, which takes this a whole nother distance here. Again, we're dealing with, so far it's been confined to a scholarly elite. The secret societies are organized around a tzaddik, which is in the Hebrew, or a rebbe in Yiddish. Rebbe is not really a rabbi, it's something much more special. But the 16th century, Rabbi Isaac Luria takes it in a whole other direction. And of course, by the 18th century, this whole thing becomes fundamental background to Eastern European rabbinic leadership. And so out of this will come in the 18th century, get the picture now, we're talking 6 centuries later after the Kabbalah has got its start, Hasidism. The word Hasid is simply a Hebrew term for a pious or a righteous person. Back in the 11th, 12th centuries, there was a community in the German side. We're not talking about Spain and southern France, but in German, the Hasidai Ashkenaz. They were German pietists. They were extreme. They had a very ascetic life, and they started to take a toehold, but quickly, about the 13th century, get eclipsed by the rise of the Jewish mysticism called the Kabbalah. And so, and we could talk about the various leaders that rise and back and forth, but the main teachings of the Kabbalah in this period is that, first of all, a heavy emphasis on the discovery of hidden codes in the Torah. And we'll show you some of those shortly. They make a big emphasis on pursuing the names of God. There are many different names of God in the Scripture, but they make a whole art form out of pursuing these, especially the 72-letter ultimate top one. It's actually not the ultimate one, because the ultimate one is regarded as the Torah itself, letter for letter, as a package. But the names of God, they ascribe to the expression of these names magical powers. There are healings and stories and anecdotes that feed those views. And of course, all this gets tied up with secrets involved with the Hebrew alphabet. You can go to Jewish bookstores and find books written of various mystical conjectures about each different letter and so forth. And of course, all this is built around the 10 Sephirot, the 10 emanations that we reviewed, and Ein Sof being the unknowable infiniteness that's at the top. Critics of the Kabbalah will point out that part of the Ein Sof, the whole thing, is a thrust to depersonalize God, and the mysteries of the inner life of God. You know, it's very interesting. If you study the book of Genesis, in Genesis chapter 9, there's this strange episode where Noah plants a vineyard, becomes drunk, and his sons take advantage of that. Now, in the text there is some overtones of perhaps homosexual abuses, but setting that aside, there's a basic crime envisioned from that event that echoes throughout the Scripture, and that's the crime of uncovering the father's nakedness. What's taught is that the father's dress shields his private nature, and to uncover that is to intrude inappropriately on him. So uncovering the father's nakedness is a crime, a sin, that's widely acknowledged among the rabbis. What's fascinating, to stand back and recognize what's going on, that's exactly what they're doing, or trying to do, with the Kabbalah, with the 10 Sephirot and all that. They're trying to get inside of the Godhead itself and speculate on its tensions. And their whole concept of, especially after the Lurianic twist in the Kabbalah, is that when the creation was done, there was a fumbling. They don't use that term, but there was sort of a gasp, a inhalation rather than exhalation, that resulted in some mistakes, and it's the sparks of the mistake are where evil comes from. And what's at risk now is to repair that failure in the creation by dealing with the evil. And as you get into those conjectures, Israel itself is part of the repair. And so it's incumbent upon the elite within Israel to adopt these Kabbalistic rituals in an attempt to assist in the tikkun, the repair of the universe. So the Kabbalah is not only just a fringe set of conjectures, it's actually almost inverting what we understand from the Scripture, that the Scripture teaches, that yes, there's a repair need to be done, but not by man. Man's not equipped to do that. But anyway, the Kabbalah emerges from the 12th to the 13th century. That's about where we are. In the 14th century, a major event occurs in Judaism, and that's the expelling of the Jews from Spain at 1492. They had to leave. And that's why Columbus and his gang, by midnight that night, had to leave port, because that was the deadline that was set up. And that causes the Kabbalists from Spain, of course, to be scattered and reestablished elsewhere. By the time you get to the 16th century, the Lurianic Kabbalah emerges, and that's a whole other twist on all of this, by Isaac ben Solomon Luria. And from his addition to the Kabbalistic perceptions is that a cosmic catastrophe occurred. The vessels of divine light shatter, sparks imprisoned in shards of evil, in effect. And it's the human task, is the redemption, is nothing less than the redemption of the world and the reunification of the Godhead. You know, when we summarize it this way, it sounds like we're being, it's very audacious. Well, but that's actually what they're dealing with. And this emergence of a human role to assist the Godhead, it also sparks the Sabbatean messianism. They had false messiahs start to surface. There's some very bizarre stories that emerge there, and then that all sets the stage for 18th century Polish Hasidism that most of us have encountered one way or another in New York or elsewhere. Van Luria, he founded this very influential school of Kabbalistic thought that has influenced all Kabbalism today. He was born in Jerusalem, raised in Egypt, and he became an adept at Jewish legal and mystical learning, of course. And what comes on the following century is Shabbatai Zevi. Now, this guy, this fascinates me. He was a Jewish false Messiah. He proclaimed himself as a Messiah. He was born in Smyrna. He was ordained as a sage, very brilliant young man. But by 1648, he demonstrated signs of manic depressive psychosis. He claimed to be the Messiah. He was expelled from Smyrna around 1651 or through 54. He wandered through Greece, Thrace, Palestine, and Egypt. He ends up getting imprisoned by the Turkish authorities. This is the Ottoman Empire day, you realize, in 1666. He converts to Islam and dies in exile. So you would think he was totally discredited. No, because you have to understand they take all these elements and create symbols out of them, and the events of his life then are Kabbalistically interpreted, and a whole movement around him continues for several centuries. And so you stand back, it's strange that you would think that these false messiahs it would be over. But that underestimates the ability of them to rationalize these things in terms of symbols that they apply to their conjectures of the Kabbalah. And so, anyway, out of this we have Hasidism, which carries with it, among other things, a strong messianic overtone. They look for false messiahs that are part of their image. And so understand that the Hasidism really emerges out of the 18th century, many centuries after the Kabbalahs got solidified. Now, the Hasidic teachings obviously emphasize maintaining the old traditions. They consciously preserve the lifestyles of Eastern European ancestors and so forth. And although each community has its own theology, its own traditions, its own practices, including a distinctive style of dress for the men and the women and so forth, they resist modern ideas and lifestyles, and strictly as they possibly can interpret the halakha, the Jewish oral traditions and so forth. They usually maintain the Yiddish language, a strange mix of Hebrew and German and Polish. It's the common language of the Eastern European Jews, and it's used in their daily life. Another big emphasis, of course, is maintaining God's experiencing God's presence, and everything they do in their life attempts to emphasize God operating in their lives, and they, despite everything that challenges that rivals that, in terms of suffering, physical desire, psychological distractions are considered just that, distractions to their commitment to experience God's presence. And they believe that cultivating an awareness of God's presence in this material world gives them an insight into the unfolding of God's inner life. There's a strange relationship between what's going on in the Godhead and what's going on in this world tangibly. And so every act of their daily life is perceived in terms of being connected, or at least an opportunity to be connected to the inner life of God, the Word of God. And so that's, and of course, buried all this is waiting for a Messiah. And like most forms of Judaism from the Second Temple on, there was ultimately the Hasidics recognize that this is all to be redeemed by a Messiah and a descendant of King David. They embrace that, and so they believe that leadership would the Messiah will come and rebuild the temple. They have a they have a big focus on that, and so their recent history too is looking at an expectation of the Lubavitches and so forth, and even when Schneerson died, they still think he may come and so forth. They have these strange commitments. Now, there's the movement known as Hasidism today really owes its popularity to a popularization by the Baal Shem Tov. And he had the goal to spread the essence of Kabbalistic learning from the scholarly elite to the poor and barely literate. And so it was an attempt to popularize that which had been held very close. And so he's considered the founder of Hasidism. Israel ben Eliezer, called Baal Shem Tov, the master of the divine name. There again, he was accredited as having skill at really using the names of God in doing what you and I would call magic. And his name, the Baal Shem Tov, is sometimes abbreviated the Besht, but he is a subject of legends himself. And so he really, his disciples, and I won't go through all of these, but it was his disciples that, with their zeal and emphasis, popularized Hasidism throughout Eastern Europe. And they in turn had missionaries in the Ukraine and elsewhere. And even Schneerson was the seventh descent from him. So the Hasidism has its spread. But Hasidism is opposed then, it became very controversial. The 1770s, 18th century. Rabbi Elijah ben Solomon of Vilna. He's called you'll see Vilna Gaon, that's a title really. Vilna's where he's from, and Gaon is a top sage, a scholar. They banned Hasidism as a heretical movement. And but the Holocaust, of course, finally rolls in here in World War II, which devastated European Jewry in general and the Hasidics in particular. It scattered the remnants of these guys throughout the world. They created new centers. They add up to about 300,000 worldwide, the true Hasidics. And so that gives us a quick snapshot. One of the things that they embrace, and interestingly enough, I'm finding some evidence that this was actually an adaptation of hermeneutics advocated by the early Christian community. But they see four levels of interpretation in all these things. The Peshat is what they call the literal. When we see something in the scripture, it's the literal. It really happened that way. That's the Peshat, the primary direct denotative interpretation. Behind that, though, is the remez, the allegorical application. That one of the reasons it's there is because there's meaning that is symbolic. And there's also the darash. In fact, logically, to put the darash before this, but there's a reason they put it in this order. The darash is the homiletical, the practical application of these stories. And then, of course, there's the fourth level, which is the mystical, mysterious side. And so these four, everything in the Torah is regarded as having at least these four levels of meaning. And of course, the first three are somewhat determinative. But the fourth is again, really moved out in the field of conjecture. But these four letters, the PRDS, Pardes, is the word for garden. It also stands for paradise. But that's the way they remember as a mnemonic for these four levels of meaning. But as you get into the literature, the reason it can go so far afield from the direct literal interpretation is because they're leaning so heavily on what they call the sod, or the mystical measurement. And this is all developed by Moses de Leon, this whole concept here that's so prevalent in rabbinical Judaism of all kinds. Interestingly enough, tracks back to de Leon, the same guy that did the Zohar. But there is evidence by some of the scholars that this really was an adaptation of the four levels of meaning used by the early expositors in the Christian community. It's the sod level that gives you no limit to the degree of conjectures you can reach out to. For example, in Deuteronomy 3, Moses has a prayer. This is explained by the rabbis in over 232 different ways. It reminds me, in a sense, of something that we have said in the computer industry for many years, and that is, if you torture the data long enough, it'll confess to anything. And that's pretty much, this is an example of most prayer. The Zohar stresses the symbolic importance, many times taking very insignificant little surface details and making a whole thing out of it. In Genesis 36, there's a short list of the kings of Edom, and they make a whole career out of that one. The deeds of Benaiah and 2 Samuel 23 are examples where in the Zohar, they'll go on for pages and pages and pages of explaining the profound significance of these would seem trivial details. But a special emphasis all the way through the Kabbalah is the alphabet, the Hebrew alphabet, and numerical mysticisms. And we'll talk a little bit about in the next session. One of the things they extol very highly is the role of the Torah. And you say, yeah, it's good, they really venerate the text, except they really see it all in terms of just symbols, symbolic character of all earthly phenomena. And they search for the hidden inner reality at all levels, and that moves right into the field of conjectures. And they have three primary principles. The Torah is considered the mystical name of God. The Torah, the whole Torah is itself, 78,000 letters. And the Torah is looked at as a living organism. And they feel there's you get to this view that not only did God create the universe, the Torah is the means by which he did it. By the expression of the Torah, they try to link the Torah literally to the universe itself. So that's a quick, obviously superficial historical summary of the Kabbalah, but what it lays against a fabric of Judaism as it redefines itself, having rejected its Messiah in the first century. And with the temple destroyed, and as they grope for a whole different basis of significance, moving to a life of commitment to good works, incredible sincerity, incredible commitment, but laced with increasingly far afield conjectures. I see this as a tether. They're not linked to the text. That tether keeps getting longer and longer and longer as they venerate rabbis of different kinds and they indulge in attempts to understand the nature of God himself, the internal workings of the Godhead, ascribing to that Godhead a fumbling that created evil, and that it is in need of cosmic harmony being reestablished. And it's the role of man, specifically Israel, to participate and bring about the tikkun, the redemption of not just the physical world, not just the redemption of man, but the reestablishment of harmony within the Godhead. And you talk about uncovering the Father's nakedness. That's the best way to summarize this whole escapade of the Kabbalah in the sense of it being taken seriously. Now, there is obviously a substantial gap between the true Kabbalah and some of these forms of popular Kabbalah, which are exploitations by promoters and what have you. But still, it's very easy for many of us as we discover, in some respects, an indebtedness to the Kabbalists for discovering aspects of the Hebrew text that are very edifying. They have made some fascinating discoveries of the Hebrew text that can serve to authenticate the text as being supernatural, to give honor and glory to its author on the one hand, but they take this in a direction that is blasphemous, really. And we'll take a look at some of the good news and some of the bad news in the Kabbalah in the next session.
We gotta praise God. Let's count our blessings. I'll teach you a lesson, and yeah, we gon' praise God. Yeah. We gotta praise God. Let's count our blessings. I'll teach you a lesson, and yeah, we gon' praise God. Yeah, right here. We gotta praise God. Let's count our blessings. Let's count our lesson, and yeah, we gon' praise God. Yeah.